All right, everyone. It is now 10 o'clock, so we will go ahead and start the webinar now. My name is Sean Redsar. I am the digital media artist at Lexion, the makers of KeyShot. And today we are going over the best practices for studio lighting product shots. If you guys can see the mouse on the screen now, this is the finished lighting scenario we have for our first setup. So let's go ahead and open up the working model, the working scene. All right. So oftentimes when you see renderings that people make on KeyShot, the lighting is perfect, or the model looks great, the material looks perfect, the camera angle is just spot on, but what many people forget to change is the environment. A lot of people just leave it at the startup. What we're using right now is the startup HDR, as you can see here, right here. So many different effects can be achieved by just changing the HDR in the environment. So that's what we're going to concentrate on for this webinar, is basically the lighting through the HDR environments, as well as, if we have time at the end, some quick fixes using some physical lights as well. So let's go ahead and get started. If you guys are familiar with the KeyShot library, the Environments tab will show you all the HDRs that come with a KeyShot, from interior, outdoor, studio. Let's go ahead and pull some of these in and see how that actually changes the lights in the scene. So you can see some really crazy stuff going on here, and just show you what's going on. While some of these outdoor and interior shots are pretty cool, for a product shot it might be best to stick with a studio setup, studio HDR, mainly because it just creates a different context of the product. Like if you put a mouse in an outdoor HDR, it doesn't really make sense. It kind of has a disconnect psychologically when people see reflections of like this stone on the surface of the model. It's like, why is there why is it sitting outside? It just doesn't look quite right. So we're gonna go ahead and stick with studio lights for this setup. Like I said, we're going to use the KeyShot HDRs that come with it, but if you would like, there are also other ones you can download on the internet. Let me go show you this collection right now. A good source of really great HDRs that you can get really easily, you can find on deviantart.com under the user zbyg.deviantart.com. And if you go to his gallery and under resources, you'll find several HDR packs that are just chock full of amazing HDR studios there's a solution in there for every product shot you want to do. So just for reference, if you guys want to explore different options in HDRs other than the ones we have supplied in KeyShot, there are always other resources available online. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on. Yeah, so for our mouse shot, and go ahead and get back to the top view. Yeah, so we are working with a product, so we want to use a controlled environment to kind of really highlight the surface development and show what's going on. Right now, like I said, we are working in, let's put back the startup HDR. So this is what most people leave it at. The thing about this setup, it's very uniformed, and you don't get quite as much detail or communicating those different surfaces, like this falling crease right here. Not quite super clear what's going on here. There's a hot spot here that might not be so pretty if you just kind of bumped it down a little bit. So let's go ahead and just kind of go through some of these HDRs and see what works best. So I'm going to just try to throw some of these on. And you can see how it's like really dramatically changing how our model looks. Now, a lot of people would probably just start throwing these on. It's like, well, what am I going to do? The best strategy before you start even throwing these on is having a strategy of what the direction of your rendering is going to be. For instance, for this model, for this render, I want to have a more really clean, communicative rendering that has shows the surface development of the curvatures and the real sculptural shape of this mouse. So I'm probably going to use something that has a little more fuller lights, like this one, like this light tint. So it has it fills up the space and it really kind of catches the surface nicely. Like I said, but if you wanted to have something with a little more drama, you might want to have something with a little more contrast. So you might want to choose something with a black floor, possibly. Like, let's find one. Maybe this 3-panel tilt. So this one has a little more black, and the floor is a little bit darker, and you could see like the reflections are kind of nutty on top. But it does have a little more. It doesn't communicate as well as the other one, but it does have a little more drama to the scene now. So that's some things you have to think about before you even start laying down some of these environments. Is have a game plan of what your final rendering is going to be and what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to communicate with your rendering. So let's go ahead and go back to the light tint white. So this is our starting point. A lot of people, when they throw on a scene as well, an environment, they kind of stop there and they don't really touch any of these toggles here, which can really enhance your scene. So you know you might have played around with the contrast a little bit and brightness. But what I like to do is actually go ahead and open up the HDR editor to actually use these settings within the HDR editor itself. That way you can save them out and refer to them later if you need to. So let's go ahead and open up the HDR editor by clicking on the Edit button right next to the environment text area right here. It's the third button right here. It says Edit. And you can see there's a lot of similar sliders as the Environment tab, but there's a few new ones as well. The first thing you'll notice is the saturation and hue. These sliders are not going to affect our HDR right now. As you can see, I'll just put this over here so you can see this better. So I'm sliding this down, you're like, why isn't it working? This is because our HDR right now is a black and white image, and there's no real color data to work with. So you can slide this all I want, it won't affect it. It'll probably affect more things like the outdoor or interior HDRs, which actually have more color data already embedded into it. So we don't really have to worry about these right now. So let's go ahead and just set these back to default. But like you said, like I showed you last time, there's still the brightness slider and the contrast slider and the rotational slider right here. So they do the exact same thing as if you were using them on the Environment tab. An interesting thing as well is the tilt slider, which if you look at the little thumbnail, it's doing some crazy things in there. This is useful for getting just the right reflections if you were having a really reflective surface right there. If you want to think about logically what's going on, let me show you what is actually happening with this HDR. So let's go ahead and make sure this is lighting environment. So I'm going to zoom out so you can show you the actual lighting environment. So if I start sliding the tilt, it's just actually tilting the HDR. So it's actually like a different type of rotation on a different axis, if you want to think of it that way. So that's what's actually going on. And if you want to logically think about how you want to tilt your HDR, I'm going to set that back to 0 so we have default. And then let me set my camera back to camera 3 so we can get back to. Alright, so go ahead and open the editor again. Alright, so now we're starting from here. And first thing I want to do is add just a little bit of color depth to our lighting. The easiest way to do this is hit the colorize check mark, and change the color. I'm going to use the temperature gauge to get some realistic lighting color. I'm going to set it to a little bit warm. Just lighten it up just a little bit. And already you can see the lighting is already looking a little bit more realistic. I'm going ahead and brighten this up a bit just so we can get some more of the detail. And maybe increase the contrast just a touch. Alright, now what I want to do is use the tilt just a bit. As you can see, there's like a little bit of weird reflection at the top here. And since I know that it's actually going to be rotating on the other axis, I know that this is probably this little seam in the HDR. So I kind of want to move that just a little bit so it's not reflecting so bizarrely right there, because it's creating some, like it could be a different surface development, which is not. So I kind of want to tilt just a bit so it doesn't have that weird bump on the edge. So I'm just going to tilt it just a little bit, and you see it goes away just because it's tilting back. Like the HDR is actually tilting away from the front, so it's no longer within the view of this surface. So now we're almost there for what I think would be a nice rendering for this. What I want to do now is communicate more of the texture on the scroll wheel as well as this fall and crease, which is kind of fade, like almost not visible, which is not good. I really want to show off that detail. The best way to do this is adding pin highlights. People haven't seen the HDR editor. The pin highlights under the pin tab. So we were first working on adjustments, which is the first tab you see when you open up your HDR editor. So right next to it is called pins. So we're going to go ahead and click that. We're going to select add. It automatically adds one right in the middle. You can see right there. Let me make this a little bit bigger, maybe you can see it. There. So this is, you can move around and you can see how it kind of affects it. You kind of try to guess where it is, but what's really cool is I'll go ahead and make sure that's selected and hit delete. Next to the add button, there's a button called delete, and it'll remove the pin that we just added. It's a really cool feature in KeyShot now. It's a new feature. It's going to blow your minds. Is we're going to select our model, and we'll go ahead and right-click it. Make sure this only works if your HDR editor is open. So if you try doing this and this is not showing up, this is because your HDR editor is not open. So make sure this is open. Go ahead and select your model. Right-click it, so it brings up your flyout menu. At the very bottom, there's a tool called Set Highlight. This is amazing. So okay, I'm going to go ahead and select that. When you select it, a little dialog box appears at the bottom. At the bottom it says Control Click Adds Highlight. Click Drag to Position. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. So what I want to have a highlight is just right here to kind of really bring out that fall and crease and bring out some of that texture on the scroll wheel. So I'm going to hold Control and click to add a highlight right here. And you'll see on the HDR editor, it actually automatically places the pin exactly where it would fall on the model itself. So that is an amazing tool. When you're done placing them, I'm going to go ahead and hit done so I don't accidentally put pin lights later. And from there, I'm just going to adjust the pin. You can adjust the pin by changing its radius, its fall off, which the fall off is how sharp the edge of that light is, basically. As you can see, if I make it super sharp, there's that nice reflective spotlight if that's what you're trying to get in your scene. For this, I kind of want to have a little softer fall off. And then you can also adjust the brightness of your pin. Let's go ahead and maybe decrease the brightness a bit. Decrease the brightness. Yeah, that's kind of nice. So you can really start to see the fall increase there. The detail of the texture on the scroll wheels really popping out. And that's really the key about lighting. It's like you can get some really great effects with lighting without having to adjust like things like the bump height on your texture map as much. I remember when I first started doing this, it's like, oh, why can't I see the texture? So I would go into my material and go into my textures and try to make the bump height 1,000,000 times high, but it just wouldn't work. All you need to do is sometimes just really set off some of the highlights in the HDR. You really get to see the textures better that way. So go ahead and set this a little bit smaller, maybe. Okay. All right. So now that we have the highlight there, I would still want to create a little bit more visual depth in our render. Maybe darken up this area just a bit. So what I'm going to do now is add another pin. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click, set highlight, and I'm going to control-click the bottom of this model to kind of darken it up, just to give a little more depth to this render. As you can see right there, it kind of places it right where it's supposed to hit. Move it around just a little bit just to center it. And there we go. And this is a really cool tool that's not really well known, but we can do, I'm going to go ahead and cut down to finish this out, is if you take your pin and bring the brightness all the way down to 0, it actually becomes a dark spot, which removes highlights and creates shadows. This is really useful for reflecting really highly reflective surfaces, to give some depth to the surfaces, and just have something to reflect off. So it just gives a little more interest in the reflections. What I want to do is just soften that up and blend it better. I'm actually going to hit the blend dialog there, just so the edges kind of blend with the color a little better. Increase the fall off. Increase the radius so it kind of fills up that space a little bit. Maybe just dial back the brightness just a little bit. As long as this brightness value is a negative number, it'll stay as a dark pin. If it goes above 1, it'll start becoming a light again. So make sure when you're doing your slider or you're entering numerically, it is a negative number if you want to keep that as a dark spot. All right. Yeah, so just for those few easy steps, we've already gotten a really nice scene with some contrast, and it communicates the form really well. So once you have everything set up, what you want to do is make sure you save as. Don't save, because if you save, you'll save over your default HDR. So you want to save as. And I already have in my environments folder, in my KeyShot resources directory, I already have a custom folder for all my custom HDRs. I suggest you guys create your own custom one, so you can find all the ones you made specially for each shot. I'll go ahead and name this mouse HDR, so I can find it later and just save. It's really important to save these out, because if you quit out and you don't remember your settings, you'll always have these settings already embedded into the HDR. All right, so now we have this top view. Make sure all my settings are correct. Self shadows, global illumination. The thing is, we want to do now is, what if we have a 3/4 view, and the lighting is still pretty good here, but what I want is a harder ground shadow. This softness is not really planting it to the ground very well. What I want to do is create another shadow, another lighting environment to create a hard shadow. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, I'm just going to find the angle I want, and then you can save out a new camera view every I made a view set, a saved camera called 3/4 view. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that view. And so go ahead and save this, because you're going to have to render out two different images of the same angle. So make sure you have this camera view saved. Another good way to, if you don't want to do the camera, you can always just lock your view, and that way when you render it, you'll have two exact renders that you can composite in Photoshop after. So what we want to do is first render out this image, which I already have done using whatever settings you need to do in your render dialog. So whatever your normal rendering settings are. I like to do is go to ping and include alpha. That way I can put it on top of another color if I wanted to. And go ahead and render that out into whatever folder you need for your project. And what we're going to do next is actually in your scene tree, in your models, I'm going to go ahead and right click, duplicate this model, go hide the original. I'm going to open up the tree for the new object. I'm going to select all the parts in my model. I'm going to right click and select unlink material, or link materials. So they're all single materials. You also click this little button right here if you wanted to link materials. It'll do the same thing. And go ahead and double click it to edit. I'm going to set the type to flat. That way we can see how the shadows may be affecting. I'm going to go ahead and change this to a different color so we can see the shadows as we're working. So this is just setting up just so we can see the shadow. So now that we have a flat colored model, we can go ahead and start playing with our HDR again to create a hard spotlight, to create a hard shadow to work with. Alright, so let's go ahead and edit. Open our edit panel for our HDR. Under the environment tab, just hit edit again. To make sure we don't, destroy our, finely tuned HDR, I'm going to go ahead and file save as right away and call this mouse shadow. That way we can work with this as well as a custom HDR. Go ahead and save that. So now we are working with our mouse shadow environment. First thing I want to do is just go ahead and delete that pin, so we only have one pin on there. So now what I want to do is take the brightness on go back to our adjustments tab and turn down the brightness all the way to 0. What that does is take the existing HDR light data and just turn all that off basically. So our scene is being lit just with the pin light, as you can see here. Problem is you can't see it right now because we're using our lighting environment as a background. So let's go ahead and select color for our lighting environment. Right now it's set to white so we can see it pretty well. So now we can start adjusting where that light's going to be to cast a correct shadow our desired shadow. As you can see right now, it is just with the default pin that we have put in. It's just a little bit soft. It's a little problematic sometimes. People are trying to find how to create that hard edge shadow for the ground plane. What I'm going to do to fix that is I'm going to go into my pins tab so we can edit our pin. I'm going to turn down our radius as much as we can. Set it to 1. That already sharpens it up. As you can see, the shadow is a little bit boxy, but if you've seen our other tutorials, you'll know that you can fix that by decreasing the ground size to be just enough without clipping off the shadow. It's been pretty good there. That's not too much. Alright, that looks pretty good. And now we can take that, maybe increase the brightness, might clean up the edge a little bit. That's not too bad. And then take the fall off all the way down to 0. So I'm going to have a radius 1, fall off 0, brightness 100. And I'm going to take that pin light and just move it around the scene till it turns into shadow the shape of a shadow that might be able to work. Now don't worry about it being super black right away. We're going to be compositing in Photoshop in a sec, just so we can play with how dark that shadow actually is. So that looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and save again. So we'll make sure it's the mouse shadow HDZ and say save. I'm going to close out the HDR, and I'm going to do another render. Make sure it's ping and make sure the settings are exactly the same as your last render. And it should render out a ping with transparency. So I've already done this, and I'm going to go ahead and open up in Photoshop. So here's our original render without the shadow, and here is the rendering of the mouse shadow. What I'm going to do is select all, Control A, all to select all. You'll see the marching ants all the way around. Make sure your layer is selected. So let me pull this in, you can see layers. I'm going to select that layer. So you can make sure that layer is selected and select all. Control C to copy. And here I'm going to paste in place. I'm going to hold Control Shift V, paste in place. It'll paste it right on top, exactly where the original render is. I'm going to go ahead and drag that layer underneath the original render, so it'll have that hard ground shadow. Since it's a transparency, it'll have the white coming through, so it's already getting lighter as it is right now. And go ahead and let's move that around a bit. You can see you can turn off and on the background to change the color if you want. So if you wanted to change this to like a red, you could, but let's just keep it at white. Anyways, so now that we have our layer of shadow, we can go ahead and turn down the opacity to whatever you need to just illustrate the shadow. That looks pretty good. And there you go. There is the rendering with the original original light setup that we did with catching off the texture in the top and the darkness in the back, and it just looks really tasty right now. But we wanted a shadow, so we added that shadow pass, basically what we did, and now it has a nice ground shadow for it to sit and anchor it to the ground. So that's a pretty easy, basic way of really utilizing the different HDR and HDR editor to create some really nice renderings with KeyShot. So that was good for kind of a rough plastic or shiny plastic. What if it was super reflective, like a silver model, or like jewelry or something like that? So let's go ahead and look at something that was a little bit more reflective. So this is a watch that is lit using a completely custom HDR setup. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how I went about lighting this environment. Let me show you what the environment actually looks like. So this is what it looks like in the thumbnail. I'm going to go ahead and open the editor here. You can see how many pin lights that we've added to this HDR to kind of get that detail level in the reflections. The best way to start this is, like, let's go ahead and pull in, we'll close this out first, and then we'll pull in just the startup one, because this is kind of arbitrary at this point. We're not going to be using the HDR light information from whatever we pull in. We're going to turn that to black. So let's just pull in the startup just for a file to work with. Open up the editor again, and let's turn the brightness all the way down so the model is completely black. It's not being lit at all. To start off with highly reflective models is you probably want to add some light on the top and the bottom just to give it somewhere to start. So I'm going to go ahead and add one pin light so you can see how that affects the lighting of our model right away. I'm going to take that all the way down. And I am going to increase the radius. And then increase the fall off all the way so it becomes more of a gradient. What I want to do is basically create like a light gradient at the bottom. What's interesting though is the slider stops at 1. But an interesting, you know how KeyShot usually has parameters beyond the slider, so I'm going to go ahead and type in the number 2, and it'll actually give it a more gradual fall off right there. Increase the brightness. What I'm going to do now is give it a warm tone, or maybe a cool tone. Let's start with cool, just to give it some color depth. And I will use the radius again, just to punch it up. Why is there ground down here? Oh wait, environment. I'm going to go ahead and add another pin light. This time I'm going to use it to light the top. I'm going through the same steps as the bottom light. I'm going to increase the radius, turn the fall off to 2. This time I'm going to color it with a warm tone. With highly reflective surfaces, it really adds some real great color depth if you have two lights that are warm and dark, or warm and cool that are opposite each other, like one on the top, one on the bottom. Just add some real richness to the tone of the metals. Go ahead and adjust that just a little bit more. Just give it a little bit lighter so it's not so warm. Brighten it up a bit. Increase the radius. I'm turning on the brightness because I am anticipating that I'm going to be adding a few, quite a few more pin lights to the scene, so I know that it's going to get quite a bit brighter on the top here. Basically, this light is just going to cast just the highlights right off the top and just add just a touch of warmth to the metal, and the same with the bottom, the same effect with just adding just a touch of cool light from the bottom. So I'm going to maybe turn that down just a bit. All right. So now we are going to use our magical set highlight tool again, and we're going to start just filling up the HDR so we can really paint. We're basically painting the HDR to create a nice lit environment for our metallic. So I'm going to hit right click, set highlight. So control click adds highlight. The first thing I want to do is just light up the face. So I'm going to control click here. Automatically it brings it up. I'm going to play with it a little bit. I know I'm going to start tweaking with this a lot while after I place all the pins, so I'm just going to just differentiate it just a little bit, maybe. That's good. And probably want one. I'm going to add one on the edge here because I want that to be lit as well. So control click here. Wow, that's really bright. So I'm going to just turn that down just a bit. Maybe make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to add another one here. Wow, that's really bright. You actually can just, after you add it, you can actually just move it and see how it affects it. What I'm trying to do is create a nice gradient right here in the middle for the reflection. And just by adding a few pins, you can really create some nice reflections there. I'm going to turn that down as well. Maybe increase the fall off a little bit. There we go. Bring it down just a bit. Yeah. All right. And then maybe another one on top. Yeah, that's really bright. So I'm just gonna fine tune that just a bit. It's pretty close. There's a few things going on. Just after you kind of put a few pins, stand back from it, and just kind of squint your eyes and look at what's the different light values coming at you. We kind of want to have a nice dark, medium, and light. You know, like dark for the bottom, light for the top, and medium for the side. So the side's a little too bright right now, so I'm going to turn that down a touch just to soften it up a bit. Let's turn down the brightness. Go with a little more contrast. Key also with metallic, highly reflective surfaces is if you have everything set to 100, to 10, you're going to lose a lot of your surface detail because it'll be blown out. So you make sure you're aware that your details are being reflected and not being blown out. Like right here, it's a little bit blown out. To get a little bit better communicating what's going on the surface here, you kind of want to have a gradient. So let's go ahead and maybe we turn this one down as well. Yeah, see how that gradient's coming right here? Just communicating a little bit better of the surface. And maybe I want, let's just, for funsies, let's see if I want get rid of that little dark spot on the stand right there and there. Maybe that might help if I just put a highlight right there. So I'm going to control click there. That adds a little weird tiny highlights. Let me increase the radius and see what happens. Increase the fall off just a bit. It's a little bright. I don't know if I like that. What's great about the pins is if you want to play around with the pins, and like I am doing, you can easily enable and disable them on the fly and just see how that affects the scene. Yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm digging that pin. It did affect all these edges though, which does need a little bit more oomph. Go ahead and add one just right there. And maybe if I just make it fall off really high, turn down the brightness. Let's see, this one maybe. Go ahead and delete that one. Oops. Yeah. I'm not quite catching the brightness here though. Let me try again. Just move it around a bit, maybe that might catch it. No, let me just take this one in. Increase the radius just a bit more, that might help. No. Oh, there it was. Right around there maybe. And then I can add this one. Turn that one on, turn down the brightness just a bit. Let's see. Still not quite the radius. Oh, there we go. That's a little bit closer. Yeah, there we go. That looks a little bit better. Next thing I want to do is, let's see if we can create a rectangular pen light to kind of create a nice reflection in the screen of the watch itself, the glass of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit the add button because I'm going to be playing with the location of the pin quite a bit here. Under shape, we've been working with circular shapes so far. I'm going to hit that, turn that into rectangular, and you'll see how our parameters are going to change. So, you know, obviously we're not going to have a radius, we're going to have a width and height for a rectangular light, pen light, and also the angle. If you toggle the pin, the angle, you'll see it starts spinning around. Height affects the height, and width affects the width. What I want to do is catch a nice reflection in the glass. I just saw it there. That might be it. I'm going to increase the height, maybe. That might be, or the width, that might be helpful. There's some interesting things going on there. I'm going to just angle it just a bit so we can get an interesting reflection. As you can see, it's already starting to add some interesting reflections in the glass and the watch bezel itself, actually. So move that around a bit. That's too strong. That might be an interesting reflection right there. So it's super bright right now, so I'm going to turn on the brightness for sure. Just so it kind of has just a little bit of a reflection of the rectangular light. Just a little bit more. I'm going to turn the fall off all the way, just so it becomes a nice hard reflection. See there? And move it just up just a little bit. This part becomes a little bit more guesswork as we're trying to figure out where that lies on the surface of the watch. That looks pretty good. I'm going to increase the brightness again just so it pops out a little bit more. That looks pretty good. Just so I'll go ahead and assess what's going on. There's a weird highlight there. Maybe I can adjust that one. That's hard to see. So coming from this one. Yeah, it's coming from that one. So maybe increase the fall off. So as you're getting closer to dialing in your scene, just really start looking at all the little highlights, all the little gradients and reflections to make sure the details aren't being obscured by a blowout in light or a super dark area. Turn that down just a bit so it doesn't become too doesn't become a focal point of this render too much, because we really want to focus on the face of the watch. All right. Once you have your HDR pretty close to what you want and it looks pretty good to you, make sure you save as. Remember, don't say save because you're going to save over your default HDR. So save as and name it. Make sure you're in your environments. Go back in your custom folder. I'm going to name it Watch HDR. That way we can refer to it anytime we want. There we go. Maybe we can actually add some color to this as well, similar to how we did it to the mouse. So go ahead and make sure I hit colorize first so we can see what's going on. So I'm going to hit the color dialog box. I'm going to increase it to a warm value again. Let's close this down. So everything should be good. So Alright, so there is how you would light a highly reflective surface. So now let me show you some techniques in adding just a little more punch using physical lights, our new physical lights that we have. I'm going to be using this array of cherries that we have. You've probably seen them on our website. A lot of times some shortcomings we have with HDR lighting is when there is a large amount of model data, things can get obscured by cantilevered objects or just by the amount of light being obscured by the model itself. Like right here, the center of this array is a little bit dark, and we can go ahead and try to increase the brightness of it, but it'll increase the entire room. And all we want to do is just increase the center because we like the light levels that we have currently going for what we have right now. So a really easy way to just give that center some punch is adding an area of diffuse light. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and go to File, Import, Sphere. I'm going to open that one. Import. So now we have our sphere. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this guy first just because it's easier to move it when I can see it. So I'm going to go ahead and select our sphere, select the Move tool, and I'm going to move it straight up, just so it's sitting above the area that we want to get lit, which is the center area right here. Alright, I'm going to double click our sphere to edit the material, and I'm going to set that at area diffuse, area light diffuse. I'm going to set color to a cool temperature this time, possibly. And then I'm going to open up the advanced options for our light, which is the little arrow right here. Just click on that and it'll pop up all our options for our area light diffuse material. I'm going to, right now it's, as you can see, that it's cutting off some of our chair. So what we want to do is make that invisible to the eye. So right now visible to the eye is checked. So uncheck that. And you'll see it opens up the chairs again. So basically light is still casting, but it's just not going to be visible to the render. Another thing that I want to remove are these circular highlights now that are coming up on the highly reflective chairs. We can turn off the visible and reflections as well, and it'll still raise the light value in the center without having it cast a reflection. So I want to have it to be just a little bit brighter. I'm going to take the power and slide it up. You can see how that affects just the center. Let that res up just a bit. You can see how it really kind of evens out the shadow tones in the center with the ones on the outside, just so it looks a little more fluid and consistent with the scene. Otherwise, if let's go ahead and see what happens when you turn it off. That's light, and you'll see how dark it was in the center. Yeah, see how having without that light, it almost creates a real focal point of shadow in the center, which we don't want. We want to focus on the chairs. So to even that out and bring back focus to the chairs, just by adding the simple, subtle light. Oops, this guy right here. It really evens everything out, and you can really communicate the forms of these chairs and not have people, people focusing on the center, like, why is that so dark in there? So those are some. Oh, it's already 10:52. Yeah, I think that's all the tools that I can give you for this hour right now. But I guess any other questions, you can email me at sean@luxion.com. And thank you for showing up, and I hope you had fun while we did this webinar. I will see you guys soon.